Here we are. Hi, everybody. Melissa here. I am so excited to talk with everybody today because I specifically asked a friend of mine to join me for what I think is a very important conversation that we are just not having enough of. So obviously you can probably already see him on the screen. We've got Britton Culper here. He's from Geek Centered Therapy. He's a licensed marriage and family therapist. And one of the things that I noticed since we started in this whole pandemic space is that we've been providing a lot of resources to business owners, but I haven't seen any that are actually about mental health. And I know that this is a conversation that's coming up in other forums, but it really hasn't been coming up in the small business circles that I'm in. And I think that's a real disservice because it's part of health just as much as any other pandemic is. And, if we're not talking about it, it doesn't mean it's not relevant. And it's probably a very relevant subject to small business owners.
Oh, yeah.
So I'm really excited that Britton said yes to joining me for this conversation, just to raise, I hate to say raise awareness for mental health,
okay,
but I think what I really want to do is make sure that we're letting people know, small business owners know, that if this is something that you need to be looking at in your own life, depending on how you're feeling, how your employees are feeling, that there are a lot of people out there who probably understand and are in the very same space that you're in, and that there are probably some resources available to you or some strategies that you can start with that might make it easier to cope with wherever you're at right now. And if you're feeling really good from a mental health standpoint, great. I hope that you can keep that up. But what we really want to talk about today is just getting some information out there that if you or anybody else that you know is in any way struggling, here's some things that maybe you can think about that might help get you on a better track. So does that sound good to you, Britton? Do you want to have this conversation?
Yes, I do want to have the conversation. It is a big conversation. It just reminds me of like when I had a management role at a small wine shop. It was just challenging because we were just busy trying to just do the business. There was no structure. There was a department that we could go to. It was just if someone had problems, with like stuff at home, or was having trouble showing up on time or something like that, there was just only so much bandwidth to talk about it. It was just all right, can you solve your issues if you need to, but there was a lot of pressure to like be kind, but also you can't take someone on to raise, was an expression that came up. You can't just spend like a whole bunch of time bringing someone up to be able to do the job. You just don't have time for that in a small business.
Yeah,
that's my impression.
Including if you're the owner and it's you that's in that spot as well.
Yeah.
I think one of the things that I think is true for a lot of small businesses, some people are solopreneurs and they work by themselves and they're in a very much a silo in operating their business. But even if you're not, even if you've got other people on your team, I still think to some extent that is a very small world that you're living in. And only when you start really having conversations with other business owners might you realize that some of the things you may be struggling with, probably there are other people who are struggling with it too. It's just that you can't see what everybody else is doing because you're in this, everyday grind of getting your own business done. So I think that's so true.
Something I'd love to address is just the subtle warning signs that happen. Like, it's not just you wake up one day and you feel like I need to go jump off a bridge. This is all terrible. It's usually like over the course of weeks or months, like I'm just not enjoying what I'm watching on TV anymore. Or like I used to be doing into woodworking and now I'm just like, it just doesn't be rewarding anymore. I must not be into this particular hobby or whatever that is. And one of the warning signs is just like starting to notice, taking time to notice, first of all, taking time to notice like when things aren't as interesting anymore. When you find yourself like spending all of your free time just doom scrolling, and it's like, you're kind of at the mercy of like getting little hits of dopamine from various things, or like checking your email. That's when it's time to like try something else. Like that really starts with selectively, like trying to selectively numb, like, okay, I have this particular fear, I have this particular thing I'd rather not think about. Well, I'm just going to just try hard to just focus on something else. Well, the problem is we can't selectively numb. So if you try to numb like whatever's you don't want to feel, the good stuff starts kind of drying up too. And that's just something that I don't think is part of the conversation often enough. It's kind of like having an instrument panel with like a blinking light, like, hey, please pay attention. Nothing's fun anymore. It's a great place to notice when it's like, this is not quite serious depression, but this is when you have a chance to do something about it. Does that make any sense?
It's really resonating for me. And,
Yeah.
One of the reasons we're having this conversation on video
Yeah.
is that, Britton and I had a pre-conversation about, how much I'm willing to say personally. And
Yeah.
I know I don't always jump in and say every little detail of my life, nor do I think I'm exactly going to do that here. But, what you're saying really resonates for me, because there have been several like key points in my life where I've been like, oh, my mental health needs some caretaking right now. And in the process of really thinking through those things, I found some techniques and some tools and some ideas that worked for me that may not work for anybody else. But one of the things that I noticed, in the last several years, I had a little bit of a rough patch, and I found that I was in a space where I was sort of getting by every day by finding ways to comfort myself. And I was in a space where I couldn't actually imagine what joy felt like. So it's like, I think that is a version of what you're describing, where it's like, if you feel like you're just getting up every day and just doing the things and then going to bed, and you're going to get up the next day and do it again.
Yeah.
I think that's equally something to look at. And I knew for me, it was too big a jump to ask myself to go from where I was to feeling super elated and happy all the time. I felt like there were some other things that I needed to address in there to release me into that space. But I do think what you're describing, that like numbing feeling, I think that is a bit what I was doing, of just like finding ways to soothe myself through a given moment, but it wasn't really getting to the root of the issue, and it wasn't going to get me to the other side. It was just going to get me through this one moment.
Yeah, like I've been probably way too into meditation in the last year or so, but I've learned some really interesting things about like what is sometimes called the monkey mind. It's basically another way to describe like the mammal part of our system, the emotional part. Like we can be like, if we're in that kind of monkey mind is another way to describe kind of being an automatic pilot. It's like, I'm getting up, I'm getting dressed, I'm doing the job. At the end of the job, I'm kind of like trying not to think about it, and then I'm going to go to sleep. Or I might like eat too much, or I might drink too much. That's the monkey mind, or the automatic pilot mode is kind of like, it finds you the simplest way to solve the problem. You're not feeling good? Keep scrolling. You might find something interesting. Which is different than having a sense of like value. Like, I want more joy in my life. I'm going to find things that give me joy. That's leading with like the more cerebral cortex. Like that's more leading with like thinking through what kind of future I want. You have to include the intuition as well, because you can't just like make it up. It has to be something that works for you. You got to kind of like have a little bit of like animal monkey mind and a little bit of like heart and values and thinking ahead, and then we can put them together. The exact same thing, like the exact same actions of like showing up and doing your job can feel completely different if you have like a plan and a goal and like, this is what I want to do, versus I'm just showing up. It's the exact same object, the exact same routines and habits. That's just weird to me.
Yeah, I think it's
kind of rambled there. I'm going to own that. You kind of days off politely, totally fine.
That's what we're
Uh,
doing today. By the way, folks, I didn't tell you that I met Brenton from doing improv comedy. So we are taking this conversation where it goes and what it
yeah,
seems interesting to us, and hopefully it'll be interesting to you.
fair
But
enough.
I think we've had so little conversation about this in my circles that I'm
Yeah,
happy to explore it more in whatever direction it goes in. I
sure.
mean, I think what you're saying is really interesting. So, what are some things that somebody can look at in themselves or in employees that may show that there's a warning sign, or a pre-warning sign where you might think, okay, I need to spend a little attention in this area of my
Hmm.
life to make sure that I'm doing okay.
Um, Boy, that's a great question. As far as in employees, I think that could be just sort of watching for compliance instead of enthusiasm. I mean, not every job is going to be great and exciting, and that's fine. Um, but there's a certain amount of just showing up that you can tell if you notice. There might be a change in that. And yeah,
And then for
I don't
like
even know
the
where to go there, but
Yeah,
that's the thing to
for
notice.
like a business owner themselves, maybe somebody who's
Yeah,
listening to this, I'm sure that warning signs can look different for different people, and I'm sure
yeah,
you've seen a lot of that. So, I
yeah.
mean, we talked about a couple things, but maybe are there other things that you've seen categorically that people may describe as how they're feeling that is a sign, okay, this is something that I should look into right now?
Can you tell me more about that? I'm not sure I
Yeah,
understand
so like,
what that is.
I think people might describe depression or anxiety or any of these things that you may be feeling in
Yeah,
terms that make sense to them.
yeah.
At times in my life, for example, I might have
Hmm.
said, I feel like I'm moving through water right now. I'm like moving
Yeah.
underwater. I feel like I'm moving really slowly.
Hmm. Yeah. Okay.
Or it's like hard to get up in the morning, or like there may be certain things that like somebody comes to you and they say, I don't know, this is just something I'm feeling. And they think that's a normal thing to be thinking and feeling. And it's actually just, well, that's actually something we can work on.
Yeah.
What are things that might come to mind with that for you?
Well, one of the things I hear used a lot is feeling empty. Um, like if you don't have anything that um, fills your heart somehow, you're just gonna feel like a little empty, a little used up, a bit drained. Like people working the same job, um, they might complain about it to each other, but you can tell like some have like a thing on the side where they're in a band even if it sucks, but they don't care because they're having a good time. um, it's the lack of like other things that make them happy. um, or used to have they had a hobby that made sense to them at the time and now they're just not doing it anymore. you know as an employee you might ask them like, so how's that thing going? Are you still doing whatever that hobby was? Or if they're kind of like, oh well, they respond in like a very neutral way, then you might be able to say something. um,
What would
mm,
something like anxiety feel like? Because I feel like we're talking a lot about stuff that hovers around the area of
yeah.
depression, but
Mhm.
anxiety is a potentially concurrent but different bucket of things, I'm guessing. So,
Yeah, anxiety. Gosh, anxiety shows up a lot of different ways. Um, I think it's less sneaky than depression. Like anxiety is like it's more visible. Maybe I'm a little obtuse because I'm like a little hyper aware of other people's emotions. Um, I'm not sure how to describe anxiety as like sneaky. It's like they're just anxiety is like not trying things. It's just being um, well, no, hang on. Anxiety could show up as being chronically tense. Like
mm,
if there's like they always seem to be tense based on their like how their body moves or like they're like my neck again. Um, it might be just whatever their exercise habits are, or it could be just like physiologically holding on to an unexpressed emotion. Like that's a thing. Like if you ask body workers and people kind of get into like the more theoretical end, if you will, of massage therapy, I believe there's a theoretical end, which is weird. People have massage therapists have this experience of working on someone, and that person might just start sobbing or have some other unexpected emotion come up and they call it a somatic release, like whatever that intense emotion, it somehow gets stuck in the body that we're not quite sure how to describe. But it happens enough that it's a thing. You don't know exactly what causes it, as far as I know.
I think that's a really interesting thing to be aware of, because we've been in, okay, I mean, this is not meant to be like an evergreen conversation. We're living in the middle of a pandemic right now.
Yeah.
And I think that there has potentially for some people been a prolonged period of anxiety. And I think it's really easy to sort of justify, well, that's what the circumstances are. Things are hard right now. You know,
Yeah.
You can give a million reasons for why it would be appropriate to feel anxiety in a moment like this. But at the end of the day, feeling anxious still may show up in your body, and it could be hurting you.
Yeah.
And like feeling anxious isn't something for us to be complacent in, I don't think. I mean, and I say this because anxiety has shown up in my body in a number of ways. And then when I finally, there have been some important moments in my life where I like spoke up for myself, and then all of a sudden the thing that I was feeling in my body went away, and I was like, oh. So I'm very aware now that holding it in is often very harmful, whether you know it right now or you're going to know it in 5 years. But if you are actually feeling something in your body right now, it may be worth exploring, like, is this stress? Is this anxiety? And is there something that I can do? Because it is hurting me to be feeling this. And it's not just something that I need to like take a painkiller and move through it. Like maybe there's another deeper root that I can address.
Yeah. Well, here's actually, so I try to get a lot of feedback when clients are like happily departing. And like most consistently, there's a particular metaphor I've used that resonates with a lot of people, and that is this slightly ridiculous one. And it's about fear, because fear and anxiety are kind of similar. But imagine, if you will, a fictional spaceship. I mean, you can go Star Trek or various other genres. There's a particular scenario that happens a lot in TV shows where they have switched power, or they've diverted power from life support into shields and weapons. And like at some point the shields, they run out of weapons, or the shields can't take it anymore. And then like people are suffering on the ship. Like we don't have enough air, or we're running out of power and life support. We can't hold this out much longer. And so that story is an interesting way to visualize what's actually going on in your body, because the hormones involved in the stress response are toxic, but awesome, because they help us have more energy. They help us be able to focus. They help us be just ready, but at a cost. And the cost is it just impacts our bodies. And so in a very real sense, we have to divert power from being anxious and ready into just being able to sit and rest, or lay down and rest and digest. And just putting it in that weird story, I've seen a lot of people just like, oh, I can't just be on all the time. My body's starting to like have health problems sometimes. And
that makes a lot of sense to me. So if somebody's in any of these, like if somebody's in this space, because I think we've been on sort of two different topics here, like recognizing depression, recognizing anxiety, and you probably can't answer all those things with one magic brush.
Yeah.
So let's say somebody's feeling anxious, or even in this space, chronically anxious right now, a prolonged period of feeling anxiety every day. What would be something that you can do? I mean, there may be many different types of things that you've seen work with clients, but what would be some things to start considering at that point?
To start The first thing to do is to start collecting information and like start from curiosity. Like if you start to notice, I actually don't like playing this game on my phone anymore. Like I'm doing it to like kind of get to the next level. Maybe some of my friends are playing it, but it's like, do I actually like it? Or, I've been checking my email at like 9 p.m. How do I feel doing that? Is there something else that works better? And just turning the awareness inward, it gives you some information. Maybe you may not want that information, but it gives you a start. And once you have that, you can start to run experiments. Like, well, what if I just stop looking at my phone at like 7? Or what if I don't look at anything until after I've had coffee, not the first thing I do, get up out of bed. You can start to kind of see what your body is telling you, because we usually have some kind of information. Eventually, we start paying attention. Does that make sense?
That does make sense. I think it makes sense, and it's something that I have done a lot of. And I'd like to share kind of what I've done to work through some of the tools that I've developed, because I think they're very much in this same area.
Yeah.
Several years ago, I found that I was in kind of a pretty deep hole in terms of my own mental health, and I could see it. I could see the space that I was in, and I thought, like I was saying earlier, I thought it was a really big jump to get from where I was to like feeling a lot of joy. So I felt like, I think there needs to be a pass through space where I'm just like, fine. I think I need to pass through fine and get to that other side. And I need to know what getting to fine would look like. So I started by trying some things. I don't know. I do research. I looked up some different options I had. I tried some things that I was hearing people talk about. One thing I tried that really didn't work for me, that works for a lot of other people. I tried keeping a gratitude journal. So I had a little journal next to my bed every night. I was like, I'm gonna write down 3 things that I'm grateful for. And if I still had that journal right now and you looked back at it, like number 1 every day was like, thankful for my comfortable bed. And like, it was so on repeat. And then after a little while, I looked at it and I was like, I'm not serious about this. Like, this is not working. Like, I'm not really that grateful yet. So what's the next thing that I'm going to try? And something that worked really well for me, I think, has to do with like collecting information, like you said. And I kind of gamified it because I'm a bit of a nerd. So I made a list for myself. I also love lists of things that make me feel good in some way. And it could be anything from getting 7 or more hours of sleep in a night, to seeing a friend, to doing a puzzle, to going to a dance class. Like, there was a kind of a range of stuff that involved just me, stuff that involved one person, a group of people. And so it was a bunch of different things. I was like, okay, these are things that I like. And then I said, well, which of these things make me feel really good, and which of these things are just baseline? So I put a little point system to it. And I said, if I get 7 or more hours of sleep in a night, I'm going to give that a 1. That's baseline, right? I don't wake up the next day feeling like that was a night to remember, but it was, setting me up for something good. And then, some of the stuff that made me feel really good, I maybe gave it a 5, and I gave it anything in between. So what I did was I took this list, I put it on a wall in my room, got a little special calendar, and every day I would just, at the end of the night, I would make and tally up and write down the things that I had done that day. So it wasn't, what I liked about it was, it wasn't me saying I have to do this same thing every single day, because I felt like that was setting me up for failure. My days look very different from each other. And it's based on schedule, clients, if I was traveling or not. And if I felt like if I was supposed to do something every day and then there was a day I didn't do it, I'd be letting myself down. I'd be getting off the wagon. Like, it would be a negative thing. But this was all about positives. So for me, it was like, any of these things I can do today, that's adding to my mental health. And I found that I started to do it at the beginning of 2019. And by the end of 2019, I was feeling fine. I was feeling good. And
Yeah.
I was on the brink of like feeling great.
Yeah.
And it took, you know, like just consistently every day, just doing little things
Mhm.
that actually mattered to me to get to the other side of it. So like the thing that I did may or may not work for other people, but I think the process was important because I found things that weren't working for me. I
Yeah.
found things that were. And then we went into this pandemic. I
Mhm.
was actually really ready because I had all these tools. And it was
Yeah.
like, I know the stuff that works for me. I just need to
Mhm.
be vigilant and like
Mhm.
stay on top of it, because the moment I let it go, I can slip back into a hole. So I'm going to
Mhm.
keep making sure that I'm doing fine day to day.
Yeah.
And it's allowed me to get to the other side of it very quickly.
Yeah.
And I think finding the tools that are right for each person is perhaps a more individualized process, but a really important one.
Yeah, absolutely. Like, I love what you're saying there for a couple of reasons. First, the way you describe it, that sounds like gamification, which is something like if you're more interested in finding out more about or watching this. Um, June McGonigal wrote a book called Super Better that is intensely about gamification, and there's an app um, that lets you kind of turn it into a superhero game or of sorts, where you like take your own thing that you're trying to do and turn it into like a system, a plan, a thing that has a routine to it. And another key part that you mentioned is finding a way to celebrate those small victories. Because we have to sort of, or it's really helpful if we train some aspect of ourselves to like notice this is good and not just like brush it off, but like had I may never get those washboard abs I'm hoping for or striving for, but I showed up today and I did the workout, and I could be like, okay, check, but it's a different thing to be like, hang on, why am I doing this? Oh yeah, I have a goal and I'm making progress towards that goal. It's a very different process. Um,
I like that.
yeah,
I
yeah,
mean, gamification worked for me, but it
yeah,
was also kind of a complicated way to go about it. And I'm a complicated kind of person, so that worked. But
yeah.
are there things that somebody can do that might be simpler?
Um, well, I was going to suggest gratitude journal. Uh,
It worked for a lot of people. I was too cerebral for it. I was like, get over yourself,
Well,
Melissa.
you have to. It really helps if you like. There's sort of like an invisible wall. If you're used to kind of numbing your emotions, if you're used to, like, I'm just not going to feel that, or I'm afraid what would happen if I feel that. There's sort of a wall to break through, and um, gratitude is a great way to sort of like open the door a crack and like let some feelings come in. It kind of primes the pump for noticing like the good stuff as it happens. And maybe it's not a journal. Um, it could be some other habit. And the reason I mentioned habit is also, I think it's important because, and this is the thing that blew my mind. Okay, by the way, I'm just going to totally steal this from a Tony Robbins thing I participated in. I thought it was brilliant. It's a little odd, but there's a great wisdom there. So it was circumstances don't necessarily dictate how happy you are. And that's a massive paradigm shift for me because that's kind of how our culture works is like, if you have this much money, you just are happy. And if you don't, you're not. Or if you have these kind of things or a partner or whatever that is, if you have these things, then things are good. But it's just not necessarily the case. And the thing that like made it sink in was when he cited it, I looked it up. Um, there was a study that compared um, two specific circumstances for people. So specifically, one could generally agree like winning a lottery sounds like a fantastic thing to have happen to you. Probably it's going to happen, but if it happens, that sounds great. And in the same opposite end is suddenly becoming a quadriplegic, like losing the use of like all four limbs all at once. Sounds like the kind of thing that would be really, really sad. It was like generally agreed upon in this, before in launching this study that that's a terrible thing that means someone would be unhappy. But they followed groups of people that had these things happen to them and asked them how they were feeling after a year. Well, it turns out that the people that in both situations, both circumstances, basically felt about the same as they had a year previously. So the conclusion I got from that was it's more about like your habits of how you look at stuff, how you're grateful for things, how you appreciate things. Those things matter much more than what's actually happening on the outside.
Mm-hmm.
You know, like I talked to a lot of people that are complaining about like, well, life sucks and these things are happening and like, because, well, there's a pandemic going on. And yes, there is. And yes, it's dangerous and it's real. And maybe there is reason to be concerned. But if you're basically staying at home all the time and ordering your groceries, for example, there's still stuff to be grateful for if you allow it to happen. You know, if you make it a habit to find something to look forward to, you'll feel better.
Mm-hmm.
It may take a while. It's not like, you know, like you were describing about the instantly happy. Like when I have low, my mood gets low. It's usually like because I was not particularly following a habit, you know, a good habit. And it takes me like a couple of weeks to like kind of come back out of it and start to feel like a little better or a little happier.
Yeah. Something else that I've been noticing right now when we talk about just sort of mood and reaction to the pandemic, I'm seeing an awful lot of people in this bucket of being really angry.
Yeah.
And not about any one thing, but reacting very quickly with anger
Mm-hmm.
and being very comfortable to vocalize it.
Yeah.
Over like the littlest of things.
Okay.
I'm seeing it come across in a lot of ways. And
yeah.
I'm wondering kind of what's at the root of that, because I think that there are a lot of people in that space.
Sure.
What would you say about like if you're feeling a lot of anger, or what is that really like? Is there something to do about that? What are your thoughts there?
Well, I mean, anger is a pretty natural emotion. It's sort of forbidden in a lot of social contexts. I used to work with an acupuncturist who was just really fascinatingly deadpan. She's like, no, emotion. I mean, like anger is healthy. You have to be angry. That's how you change things. And it's like, oh, like I'm just kind of imagining someone like Gandhi or Martin Luther King not doing the things they did from just thinking it's a good idea, but they were actually angry that there was an injustice, and they turned that anger into something. They turned it into a plan. They turned it into getting people involved. So when you talk about people being quick to act, it may be from just feeling stuck, just feeling trapped, feeling like they're in kind of a fight, flight, or freeze response that comes from circumstances that just keep coming, and they don't have a way to let it out in a way that's healthy. So letting it out in terms of exercise or some other way is great. But so anger I find it can be useful. It's an important force that you can direct for stuff. It's also important to take responsibility for it. Because one of the things that I love it's a short video, and I can share it with you later, from Brene Brown on blame, which I think that's what you're talking about with anger. There's a kind of like eruption of anger, and if it's blaming, it's like a perfect description of, I feel this feeling that I don't want to have, and it must be someone else's fault. And blaming is like a super efficient way at like getting rid of a negative emotion. It's just rude and or mean, or may erode your relationships. So finding another way to like own the anger, like, yeah, okay, I'm angry. I'm gonna go take a walk, or I'm gonna go punch something like a pillow. It's so important to just feel whatever that emotion is in a healthy and safe-ish way, so that you can get through it and not have it just sit and fester in your body somehow.
And it sounds like, again, you're pointing to like there may be a habit that you can form in this
Yeah.
area that you think will be more productive, that you can start sort of training yourself to get into that space anytime you're feeling angry or any of the things that we've been talking about.
Yeah. There's a really cool meditation by a guy named Oren J. Sofer that I'm a fan of, where it's a process involving like being aware of what's happening. Like there's, getting like noticing, okay, I'm angry again. Did I mean to yell? And then having a kind of a balanced look at it. Like, is it that person's fault? Okay. How do I feel about that? Do I like being angry that much? And then moving into being curious, like, I wonder why that keeps happening. Is there something else going on that I feel powerless about or something? And then is there something I can do, some habit I can change? And then getting support. Maybe some people around you might be willing to talk about it. Maybe not. Not everybody really wants to talk about emotions. Some people are more comfortable with it. It's like emotions are the only way to be. And some people are like, what emotions? I don't have those. Those are other people. I don't know.
They're in there. They're in there.
Usually they're in there.
I think.
Although it shows up very differently for people on the autism spectrum, especially in these sort of like so-called high functioning and that often finds themselves in like technology jobs. I've had a lot of situations where there's like one person on the spectrum in a couple and one person isn't, and they're like trying to get each other. And the person that has on the spectrum, they have emotions, they just don't want to talk about their feelings all the time. Just don't find it interesting. But they have them. They're just, they're kind of like in big block letters.
Yeah. Yeah.
Because they're focusing on other stuff.
Yeah, I think that, everything that you're talking about here, though, I mean, I think for a lot of people, it is about sort of recognizing what's there and then finding a productive way to deal with it. And it sounds like for somebody on the spectrum, there's different ways that you might do that.
Yeah.
But understanding that it still exists. I think one of the reasons I brought up anger is that I've been seeing a lot, like even like on social media. Well, social media can be a hot mess to begin with.
Yeah.
But something that I've noticed is people like out and about on their day have an experience that made them feel angry. They clearly yelled at somebody and then they came back to social media to tell people, I just yelled at this person who did this thing because they were so wrong for doing it. And what you end up getting is a bunch of people validating them. And it's like, to me, I look at it and it's like, yeah, but how much time do you want to spend feeling angry? Like maybe you disagree with what that person did. Okay, you communicated it, but it actually only hurts you to feel angry to this extent, and then like have other people validate that you should stay that way. So I think, to some degree, whatever it is, anger is a specific example, but I think any of these things that you could be feeling that we've been talking about could be fear, could be, that constant anxiety feeling. It could be this bleakness around depression or the sadness. I think being able to own, like, whatever the circumstances are, like you said, this is what I'm feeling. I'm feeling this way consistently. And I think there's something better than this for myself and for my body. So like acknowledging, regardless of the circumstances around you, this is the space that you're in. I think that's half the battle, because then you can start figuring out, like, is there some other side that I can get to from here? Yeah,
absolutely. And it brings me to, so I heard two specific points about the validation and just about and about being angry. What I'm, a pet project of mine is I think it'd be great if we could, in our society, somehow have a little bit of a split between what's your like validation, meaning like you're right. I agree with you. That person was a insert expletive here because they had their mask below their nose. Screw that person.
So I'm
You
seeing
know,
that one a lot.
that happens a lot.
Yeah.
And it's a problem. But it's one thing to say you're right, and another thing to say like I hear you. Like I want to make sure that I understand what you're talking about. Like that must have felt awful. You that vulnerable to someone else potentially making you sick, or whatever that is. Like just to listen, to try to like tune in. Like you're trying to. Okay, radio is a bit of a metaphor that's lost on a lot of people. But remember, if you remember back in the day, you could have to like actually dial it in a way to like actually get to the right frequency. Singing is better. Singing is a better metaphor. Like how it feels good when someone's singing a song and you like match that note or you harmonize with them. There's a satisfaction that happens, and that's the same kind of satisfaction when you're angry at something and someone's like, "Yeah, I hear you." But one of the things I see a lot is like you want to actually be kind and understand that person. What if you disagree with them? It doesn't mean you can't like let them feel heard. It just doesn't have to be like, and I agree with you. Because mostly we really want to be heard. We don't have to be agreed with. It's just nice. So to like separate validation from attunement would be like really cool. I think it'd make the world a better place. The other thing is, one of the things that sets up people right now is in feeling angry is in how it hurts you. It hurts you to be angry. It's kind of like if you're angry, you can hold on to the right to punish someone. Like I am, the way you were dismissive to me when I asked you to put your mask over your frickin' nose and you said it's fine. That anger to hold on to, like, that it feels right. It feels righteous, but it hurts you in the long run to just hang on to that feeling that that person is a righteous tool and they deserve it. Well, while you're holding that, you're still being burned by the feeling of anger. And so finding some way to be like, yes, that is unfortunate in the world. Is there anything I can do about it? Do I want to do something about it later? Is a different process than just like, oh, I'm going to seethe and then I'm going to vent. And I'm just going to like file that into grievances for like how much this year sucks. That's another way.
That's a really interesting one. And I think that's, that is a conscious thought that we can have when we see ourselves getting into a space like that. I have a client that is a train the trainer model of behavioral therapy. And I was helping them with a blog at one point, and I read a really interesting detail that they wrote about how emotions, and I don't know if you subscribe to the same theory, but the idea was that emotions last, I think it was like 30 seconds or something really short like that.
Yeah.
But if we are feeling it for an extended period of time, it's because we're refiring it and re-triggering it and going through a cycle over and over again. And I thought, oh shoot, then why did mine last 3 weeks? And it's like, because I'm making it happen. So it's like, kind of an interesting idea that like physiologically, like there's a certain amount of time that we feel these things, but then if we are actively trying to perpetuate it, that's kind of on us. I don't know if you have the same school of thought there.
I do, and it's fascinating. I use what I was taught a different number, that it's 90 seconds.
Okay.
And it's, and I don't know exactly which one's true, honestly. But when I've suggested clients try this, it surprisingly works, because the thing that seems to happen first is the physiology, like how it feels in your body. Like, are my fists clenched? Are my brows furrowed? Is my jaw locked? Is my chest tightened? That physiological thing seems to be the thing that leads into an emotion. But if you focus on just the physiology, like, okay, I'm just going to focus on how much my stomach feels like it's in a freaking knot. After about, and not think about the emotion, but just focus on the physiology. It lasts about 90 seconds. And that just freaks me out because I'm used to like emotions happen for weeks sometimes, and they just keep tumbling. But if you separate the physiology from the emotion, it's like, oh, it slows down. It is a different experience compared to just like wave after wave of emotion. Just letting it happen.
And that's so interesting, especially if you are a brooder, because it's like, I'm doing that myself. Like to be able to own that, like sometimes you have a breakup and you want to play that sad song over and over again, or whatever the equivalent situation is in your life. And you can do that if it's if it's a process that you need to work through, but it is a process you are taking yourself on. Versus the physiology of it, which actually moves quite quickly, because even if it's 90 seconds, even if it's 5 minutes, how many of us actually spend a lot longer sitting with that emotion because we're putting ourselves there? I don't know, I think it's a really interesting thing, and it's one step to just sort of owning, here's what I'm doing. This is how I'm behaving in this situation, how I'm perpetuating what I'm feeling right now.
Absolutely. There's a man named Jack Kornfield with a K, that I attended a seminar on a few years ago. And his position is that each of our organs has a purpose. Or seems to have a function, right? And, the skin protects us from things and keeps everything inside. Stomach does do this, and skeletal system does that. One way of looking at the mind is its job is to secrete thoughts, and just thoughts keep coming. Sometimes they're like useful thoughts, sometimes they're vengeful thoughts, sometimes they're fun thoughts. And there's a rhythm to it. Like certain moods, the thoughts come like loop, and some they're like check, 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 because like, things are terrible, I need to do something. But if you notice, like, there's a rhythm to the thoughts, and just like the thoughts keep coming, you start to have this experience that surfers describe. I don't have any aptitude towards surfing, but I find the metaphor fun. That when you watch people that are bobbing along in the ocean, they don't just take the next wave that comes and just do the surfing thing. There's a selection process, because the waves they are coming, but there's a certain like, okay, I don't like how that's not the right size, it's not the right shape, that one's going to break wrong. Yeah, it did. Like that one. And then they get up on the board and somehow magically figure out how to not fall down. And they do that process. And I think it's a great metaphor for like just watching your thoughts, like, because you don't have to get on board every one. You can just watch that one go by. Like you can be in an argument with your partner and be like, and furthermore, I'm just gonna.
I've thought against that idea. I'm gonna leave that one.
Yeah,
like a little break in the other direction.
Right.
Oh man, I like that. I think this is an interesting sort of way to cap off a lot of the things that we've been talking about, of just acknowledging. I think a big theme that's come up from what you've talked about today is sort of assessing, getting information about where you are, sort of acknowledging what it is, and then you kind of know what you can do with it, whether you're feeling depression or anger or anxiety or whatever that's looking like.
Or even shame.
Is there anything you want to say about shame? Because I feel like that's one you wanted to talk about more.
Oh, it's true. I mean, there's a lot to unpack there. Brené Brown is generally the person, if you want to read stuff, she has great things to say, and videos as well. But what's important about shame is like when you notice a problem, and I felt like it was a good timing about it. When you notice there's a problem about like, I'm just angry all the time, or I tend to do things that make me depressed, not to go into, and therefore I'm a loser, or therefore I'm just not good enough as a human being, or well, see, that's why I'm never going to find a relationship. You know, those kinds of thoughts that are like, not, I did something bad, I can change that. But when it turns into like, oh, that's diagnostic, I am bad. Or I'm just, see, I'm just not worth enough. That's an important thing to be aware of, with hopefully some kindness towards yourself. And it doesn't necessarily have to be that way. Because I think that's one of the things that stops us from being aware, is if we start paying attention, we find stuff we often don't like. And that makes us feel not so great about ourselves. You know, especially if it's something like fear of failure. You know, you start noticing like, oh yeah, I felt that again. I don't want to feel that. Because that brings like this whole shame spiral, and then I just feel like crap for a couple of days. I can't afford to do that. Shame is a deterrent from growth in a lot of ways. So to be able to learn more about shame, how to be kind to yourself without necessarily letting yourself off the hook.
Mm-hmm.
So for example, a behavior change that helps people feel really good, often exercise. Exercise is great because like our limbic, the lymphatic system doesn't have a circulatory pump mechanism. We have to like circulate things like cortisol through our system by moving around. So if we know like exercise is good for us and we keep failing at actually starting an exercise program, and then that means, crap, I feel like a failure. That's something I'm just gonna turn that off and not think about that. That's how a lot of people kind of cruise through life. So if you start paying attention, you might notice shame, and it's important to be kind to yourself. It doesn't mean you have to never again try an exercise program. It just means you might have to try something else. You know, find something else to motivate you to do that. And shame sucks. Shame's not good at motivating people.
Yeah, it's not a fun space to be in, I think, if you're feeling it. And it sounds like it can be a little bit more insidious in how we communicate with ourselves in that way. And I think even what you said, I think there is a difference between saying, I feel afraid and I am afraid, you know, like maybe you just feel it, but you aren't that forever. You know, it sounds like there's a distinction there of saying whatever it is you're feeling in this moment, you can pass through that, you can learn from it, and you can get to the other side of it with the right approach for you. And, you know, we've been giving a few examples of types of approaches, but that sort of diagnostic level being like, okay, here's where it is. Like, this is what's happening right now. I acknowledge that. Now what? But shame sounds like it can get you stuck in that loop for a while.
Yeah. And a way to get through, I mean, there's a lot of things that are involved with shame. It's sort of simple and sort of complicated at the same time. But if you pick out what your values are, like I can even send an attachment as a list of like an exercise you can do, totally stolen from a Brene Brown workshop that I've been attending, where you like look at all these values and you kind of pick which ones are yours. Picking your values like on purpose can help you get through the temptation to like slide right into shame. Like, it's much more effective to try to like start to lose weight or quit smoking or something if you have like an end in mind. Like, I want to have this, I want to be able to do this thing, I want to have this particular experience, I want to be able to hike in you know, in some particular trail or something. Like there's a beautiful one in Portugal, a friend of mine is going on, and I can't remember what it's called. I looked it up again. But you have like an end in mind, then it's so much easier to like show up and like do certain habits because I want to do that. It's so much more effective than like, well, I just better exercise because I'm just a fat slob. You know, one is self-critical, and by the time some other stressor comes up, you're going to lose track, and it's just not going to be as important, and you're going to skip one day or 12, and then go screw it. So picking those values can be super important. I mean, that's what resonated for me when we were talking earlier about like how you wanted to make a move. it's like, well, I thought about these values, and then, well, this is actually what I want. I'm going to move towards those.
Mm-hmm.
Um,
Yeah.
yeah.
Absolutely. So many great different kinds of techniques and things that we can look for. And
Mhm.
I think it's worth saying that no two people are the same. So what works
Yeah.
for you might not be the same as somebody
Mhm.
else. But I do think there has been a consistency here in what Britton's been saying about the need of just sort of assessing what's happening first, because you can't, like, how do you move forward if you don't know where you
Yeah.
are?
Mhm.
And then finding like the right approach for you to get through that moment. And it sounds like habit has been a word that's come up a lot for
Mhm.
you, and it could be
Yeah.
habit in terms of what you're doing, or habit in terms of the value system that you go
Mhm.
into.
Yeah.
um, but I really appreciate you know everything that you've been sharing here, Britton, because
Cool.
you know for people who normally follow what I put out there, I am planning to try to start doing some videos maybe once a month. This is
Mhm.
probably going to be the longest one by far.
Okay.
And that's, to me, that's great, because we've
Cool.
spent 0 minutes in my circles talking about mental health. And I
Mhm.
think that this actually covered a lot of different angles of this conversation.
Yep.
One thing that I would like to do before I publish this, and
Yeah.
I'm announcing it here,
Mhm.
but you're going to see, anybody who's watching this is going to probably see it at the same time. I'm
Mhm.
going to go through this video and kind of index some of the different resources that you were talking about, Britton, and
Great.
throw that back to you and say, is there anything that you want to link,
Yeah.
any links that you want to include, any resources that you want to be included with this when this goes out?
Okay.
Maybe things that you mentioned, maybe things that you didn't, and you think about after
Mhm.
the fact, as if you're feeling like you need some more information about this, here's a person or a website or whatever.
Yeah.
One thing that I do want to ask you, and you're welcome to include this, is how can people reach you if they want
Mhm.
to talk with you, or if you have a full client load and
Mhm.
you love the idea, but maybe there's someplace else they can go to get help.
Yeah.
Where can they get more information locally if they need that?
Yeah.
So you're welcome to put a plug in for that now, or
Yeah.
we'll include it in the notes.
Yeah.
And I want to make sure that people have, so much of what we've been talking about is assessing where you are, but then having access to resources or habits or whatever. So
Mhm.
knowing that people can ask a question where they need to, I think it would be good to have that information out there as well.
Sure. Yeah, I'll be happy to share some resources, maybe even some podcasts on some topics that are useful. Let me see. Nope, I just blanked on just blanked on what I was going to say.
Yeah, no worries. I mean, podcasts would be awesome. And if people, have a place they need to go to because they feel like they actually do want to get help with it,
Yeah.
maybe where they might
Yeah.
look to
Yeah.
get that kind of information more customized and on the fly.
Yeah. I mean, Psychology Today is a great starting place. It's a very popular start to, like, I'm going to look for a therapist. And it's kind of like an awkward sort of like online dating thing. It's like, what's this person like? Do they like things that I like? And it's just odd, but it's important because you have to find someone. It really works better if you find someone that's similar to you in some way, or at least gets you. Like it's not like a urologist where like they do a thing and things are fine. So you have to like talk to this person about things that are touchy, and like they have to tell you things that like work for you. So it's important to, like, if you decide to find a mental health person, to like interview a few, like decide like, is this person someone I want to talk to like once a week, or wonder if it's every 2 weeks. So that's a big deal. I do have some room in my caseload, just like 1 or 2 people. Otherwise, I'm usually on the edge of like, oh, I'm full. No, I'm not. But otherwise, yeah, I can send some other links.
That sounds
Where to
great.
go
Yeah,
and stuff like
I'll
that.
go through and sort of listen back for anything that you might have mentioned, and if you want to add to that inventory, we can do that. I think
Sure.
this is a lot of information and resources in one session, but I
Yeah.
mean, what a great tool that people
Mhm.
will have now if you also have been like me and not seen any information about this circulating in your circles, I think it's good that we hit on so many different things, because I do think it's easy to get into a conversation about one specific part of this and then think that doesn't really fit what I'm feeling and then just discard it. Whereas I think, being able to take a more well-rounded look at all the different kinds of things that could be happening, and kind of how to approach it is something that I think there can be value for anybody listening to this. And even if you're listening to this now feeling like, I'm feeling okay, I'm doing just fine, life does this. And so we have to be ready with the tools that'll work for us in the moments that get harder. And that this year may or may not be the harder year for you. But maybe there's, something ahead that you'd be really glad to have some of these tools for. And it can make all the difference in the world. I think, something you had said earlier, to paraphrase something that you had said earlier, you can look at the same exact situation and feel differently about it depending on where you are. And I think that, ability to have a different lens on when you're in a situation may make you interpret it completely differently or feel a completely different way about it. So, if you go into the next hard circumstances of your life with some of these tools, will it make it a little easier for you to manage it and to cope and to get through? So I think there's no downside to spending attention on this area.
Yeah, because I think most of us are just doing the best we can with the tools we have available. And I don't think it's reasonable to judge anyone for not using the right tools if they haven't been exposed to them. So yeah, it's a lot of kindness towards yourself and others, and hopefully a little experimentation. I'm kind of get excited about experimentation because it's well, how else are you gonna know what works for you unless you try stuff?
It's so true.
People that are entrepreneurs, the cliche of entrepreneurs is how many bankruptcies usually happen before a big success? Because there's a lot of failure. You have to find out does this product work? Is this a great thing but nobody cares, or it doesn't actually solve enough of a problem, or people don't really understand how it works. You need to try something else to communicate it. There's iterative stuff in business all the time. Why not towards yourself?
Yeah, I so totally agree with that. Well, I do want to thank you for taking the time to have this conversation that went in so many different directions. And I found it really helpful, and I hope other people will too. But yeah, I look forward to getting all this together, including some resources for people, packaging it up. And, thank you so much for taking this time and sharing your thoughts on it.
Thank you for setting this up and making this happen and listening. I hope it's really helpful. It's really fun to be here.
Awesome.
Well, here, yes.
Whatever here looks like in a virtual world. It's like Schrodinger's here. All right. Thank you everybody for listening. And if you made it this far, thank you for, investing this much time in this. And I hope that these resources help you. Take care, everybody.